everyone, and welcome back to Until Saturday. I'm excited to introduce my co-host for today. I'm Nicole Auerbach. Austin Meek and Cameron Teague. Austin covers Michigan. Cam covers Ohio State. So there's lots of news going on with both of these programs. We have staffing updates and non-updates. We've got, I guess, signing day. I keep calling it that, but like very begrudgingly, because not a lot of players actually got signed. Portal updates and all of the above with two national title contenders. Excited to have you guys on. We're going to talk about what's going on in Ann Arbor, in Columbus, realignment's impact on regionality, rivalries. We're going to create some new ones for some of the new Big Ten members and go through the anatomy of a rivalry by looking at the game. We're also going to dissect the Dartmouth ruling related to the regional NLRB decision, the Big Ten, SEC advisory group, I won't say alliance, and the TRO with the Tennessee case. So lots and lots to get into. But Cam, Austin, so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me on the Until Saturday feed.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
All right, this is going to be fun, and we can all get along, even though both sides of the rivalry, it's a little heated. We actually got a really great mailbag question. I want to tease this for later in the show about Sherrone Moore's ascension to the head coach position and how that compares to Ryan Day taking over from Urban Meyer. So we'll get to that eventually. Before we dive into all of these pressing topics here in an off-season edition of Until Saturday, I want to remind you, you can follow this podcast on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Help support us. Give us a 5-star review. Give us some questions, some comments. We love to have that. You can also subscribe to Until Saturday on YouTube. You'll get notified when there are new episodes because obviously it's not going to be every single day in the off season, but we're going to have you covered when there's news. And even when there's not a ton that's pressing, we will dive into the meatier topics and stuff that we have time for. You can always leave us a voicemail on the Until Saturday phone line for future mailbags and also the prompts on the website on theathletic.com/college football. Each week we'll have mailbag prompts. Send us questions or just send us a voicemail, 316-462-9852. All right, Austin, we're going to start in Ann Arbor, the home of the defending national champs, where there is a lot going on for Sherrone Moore. It's his first few weeks as the head coach of the University of Michigan. This happened really, really late in the cycle because Michigan played so far into the national championship game. And then Jim Harbaugh had to wait for the NFL cycle and different openings. And he goes to the Chargers. And then he starts hiring coaches. And a lot of them are very familiar names. And I'm seeing a lot of mixed reaction from Michigan fans because Sherrone Moore is the guy that Jim Harbaugh wanted to succeed him, but he's kind of taking some of his best coaches with him to San Diego. So run us through who is staying, who's going, and what we should make of Jim Harbaugh taking basically most of the defense with him to LA.
Yeah, I mean, if you know anything at all about Jim Harbaugh, you know that winning football games is the number one priority in his universe. So if there's somebody at Michigan that can help him win games with the Chargers, that person is getting an offer from Jim Harbaugh. There is no sentimentality from Jim Harbaugh of, I want to leave this guy for Sherrone Moore to give Sherrone Moore a better chance to win at Michigan. That's just not how Jim Harbaugh thinks. So it started with Ben Herbert, the strength coach, who is one of, if not, I think, the most important figures in this run of success that Michigan has had. Michigan thought they might have a chance to keep him. Jim Harbaugh came in with more money. He's going to the Chargers. Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, who is one of the hottest defensive coordinator names out there, he is going with Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers. That's not a big surprise. Mike Elston, the defensive line coach at Michigan, is going with Jesse Minter to be part of that staff. Some other support staff members at Michigan are going to be going there as well. So I don't think it's a real big surprise that Jim Harbaugh is pretty ruthless in trying to get everybody he can get from Michigan to join his staff, but it certainly has created a challenge for Sherrone Moore as a first-time head coach now to build a new staff around him.
It's a great point that you make about kind of like this is who Jim Harbaugh is. And Cam, I'd be curious your read on all of this too, because you've covered college sports for a long time, but you've also just covered coaches and the dynamics at play here. Does it surprise you that someone who, will do what it takes to win and is going to approach things that way and has gotten to the top of his profession by being exactly who he is, would take away pieces that could help his successor at his alma mater after winning a national championship?
Yeah, I think just in my experience with coaches and knowing coaches, it's just, and you guys know this, college sports and sports in general is just a ruthless thing. Like you have to do whatever it takes to win. I'm not surprised Jim Harbaugh is taking all these coaches with him. Um, I think he'd be doing himself and the Los Angeles Chargers a disservice if he didn't take the coaches that he thought was going to help him succeed right away. Sherrone Moore have to just build. I don't think the program, like, they're losing a lot of guys. He's taking a lot of coaches, but he'll have to build the program kind of in his own way. But I don't blame Harbaugh. You have to do what it takes to win, because he has his own family to feed. He's got his own team to lead as well.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, Cam, people have brought up to me, well, when Urban Meyer, turned over the keys to Ryan Day, like he let Ryan Day keep the whole staff. It's a little bit different, right? Because Urban Meyer didn't leave Ohio State to take an NFL job, right? So it's a little bit different deal with Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL with these coaches that he has coached with, coaches that he knows well, has a high degree of confidence in. But I think it's a really different situation for Sherrone Moore than for Ryan Day, just because Ryan Day, I think, did take over a program, that had a lot of the pieces in place. And Sherrone Moore's taking over a program still, coming off a national championship. Like the cupboard is certainly not bare at Michigan. But he's taken over a program that he's really going to have to rebuild a little bit. I think it's, maybe initially going to be a tougher task for Sherrone Moore than it was for Ryan Day at Ohio State.
Yeah, I think that is probably very true. And also something that is going to have to factor into the way that we view Michigan in year one under Sherrone Moore. There's a ton of talent that went to the NFL draft or graduated. Like this past season was the year that everyone geared up and decided to come back. So they are losing a lot of key players. And then you are going to have to replace a lot on the defensive side of the ball. Austin, the offensive side of the ball is going to look pretty similar so far, right? Like a lot of people have been kind of sliding up into the promotion roles. Like what else do you anticipate on that side of the ball when the OC then becomes the head coach? So you also do have an offensive minded guy as the head coach as well.
Yeah, so two names that we know are going to be part of the staff. Kurt Campbell is going to be the offensive coordinator. He was the quarterback's coach last year. Would expect him to call plays and coach the quarterbacks. And then Grant Newsome will be the offensive line coach. He was the tight ends coach, a person who I think was really well regarded within the program, kind of on the same track as Sherrone Moore. Sherrone Moore came in as a tight ends coach, then he took over as the offensive line coach, and then became the offensive coordinator. And I think people see a similar progression for Grant Newsome. And then also J.B. Brown, who was an analyst, special teams analyst last year, has been promoted to special teams coordinator to replace Jay Harbaugh, who is going with Mike McDonald to the Seahawks. So those three guys right now are the three guys we know are going to be part of Sherrone Moore's staff. That still leaves 7 spots that he's going to have to fill. And there's a little bit of urgency because the clock's ticking now for Sherrone Moore to get this staff together.
The one that's most interesting to me is Austin, the first name that you mentioned, Ben Herbert, right? Strength coach. Like to me, that's such an important position in college football, and it's not the same in the pros. Like everyone's kind of more responsible for their own training and nutrition. It's a work, it's a job, it's work, it's a different dynamic than like a strength coach who's also kind of like a life coach for a lot of these players. So to me, like that one was a little bit surprising. Like you and I talked a lot about this as it was unfolding, and we were talking to Michigan folks that were hopeful that they would keep him, because I think it is a more valuable position in college football than it is in the pros. So that one does surprise me. The other coaches, Jesse Minter, that was someone that we anticipated was going to go with him all along. And everything else is kind of going a little bit by the book, but also putting Sherrone Moore in a situation now where he's got to make these decisions 2 months after a lot of coaches moved around. I think that's what's really interesting. And we're going to hit on this in Columbus too. But Austin, to have to look for coaches in February after the second National Signing Day, it's got to be difficult, right? Because a lot of people who maybe were gettable in December are not gettable now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing Sherrone Moore look more to the NFL ranks. A lot of the names that we have heard associated with Michigan's defensive coordinator search are NFL guys who are still in their hiring cycle. So it has, I think, handcuffed Sherrone Moore a little bit. The fact of the timing and the fact that this is happening all in the end of January, beginning of February. And so, it really is going to test some of the people in the organization who are getting promoted here. Justin Tress is going to be the strength coach now, and he was Ben Herbert's right-hand man. I think that there's a lot of confidence that he'll be able to continue what Ben Herbert did. But if you've ever seen Ben Herbert, like, he is a unique individual. Like, he's a big, bald-headed dude who looks really intimidating. He's just kind of one of a kind. So, take him out of the equation and some of these other people that Michigan has lost. And, we're going to find out if there are people waiting in the wings to replace those guys, or if it's more like, hey, some of these people are really hard to replace.
Yeah. And again, it's all going to impact year one for Sherrone. Obviously, thrilled to be a head coach, but these are unique challenges that he's walking into. So let's catch up with the staffing news and updates in Columbus, Cam. Again, we're recording this Wednesday night, so there might be Bill O'Brien news by the time you're listening to this, but I mostly want to hear the latest from Ryan Day. He finally spoke to the media for the first time since the bowl game, Cam, on Wednesday. So what did we learn from Ryan Day this offseason so far?
I think the biggest thing is that he's finally okay with giving up play calling, and he sounded like a heartbroken child when he was talking about it. Like, it just he's like, Ryan Day's a football guy. Hey, he loves the X's and O's. I think he loves watching film. He loves schematics and trying to out scheme the other coach. So for him to give up play calling, I think was really difficult for him. I think it's a reason he didn't give it up last year, because I don't think Brian Hartline, as a first year OC, was really ready for it. But I think it's a mature step by Ryan. I think he knows the importance of this year. You cannot lose to Michigan. You have to make a run in the college football playoff this year. I think he knows that. And if he had not given up play calling, I think it would have been a sign of stubbornness by him. I think it would be really a cause for concern. So I think that's a good move by him. That was a big deal. And then I think it's just what he's looking for in the offense and looking for out of an OC, which he found in Bill O'Brien, someone who has experience calling plays in the NFL, someone who has done a good job with developing quarterbacks, recruiting quarterbacks. I don't think he was getting what he wanted out of Corey Dennis at the quarterback coach position. I think Ryan was the head coach, the OC, and the quarterbacks coach, and he doesn't want to do any of that again this year. So. And I think this is what a lot of college coaches are going to realize now. Is just, I don't know that it's possible to be a play caller and a head coach anymore with everything that is going on with recruiting and the transfer portal and NIL, and it's just too much. And I think that's what Ryan really kind of realized going through it midway through last year. He just said it's just too much. So that was a big thing, is that he's finally ready to move on from play calling, which it didn't seem like he would ever do, but he finally has done that now.
It's so similar to the conversations that we were all having about Jimbo Fisher really this time last year, about how that was going to work and his unwillingness to really to give that up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you said it kind of felt like heartbreaking for him to admit that and to talk about it. So how does that change things, and how does that address the pressure? I imagine that it's very tense in Columbus right now, coming off of these 3 straight losses to Michigan.
Yeah, it's tense. I think there's a lot of excitement really with the momentum and the getting so many guys back from the junior class. The transfer portal did well. They're doing well in 2025 recruiting right now. But I think there's still it's Ohio State. You're always going to have a sense of urgency. You can't lose 2 games in Ohio State, or the sky's falling. So they have to win, and they understand that. But I think more so than ever, this is an important year, and I think they know that. But as far as what changes with the offense, it's still going to be Ryan Day's offense. Ohio State's offense is going to be what Ohio State is. You're probably still, Ohio State fans are going to be upset when they run jet sweeps to the short side of the field. That's just what it's going to be. But it's going to be some wrinkles with Bill O'Brien. Ryan Day has given him the autonomy to change, to add some things that he likes, but they're not wholesale changing the offense. It's just not what's going to happen because he made the point in his press conferences, offensive coordinators come and go. Ohio State still needs to be what Ohio State is. So it'll be Ryan Day's offense, just Bill O'Brien's version of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, just caveat in case Bill O'Brien is the Boston
Yeah,
College head coach,
or any
that
offensive coordinator. Yeah,
any offensive
yeah,
coordinator,
yeah,
They do
that they
come and
will
go.
that they will, yeah,
yeah. Exactly. Literally. Yeah, yeah.
both of these programs kind of dealing with some uncertainty pretty late in the calendar year. So, Cam, let's talk a little bit because we haven't had you on the show since this incredible run of returners for Ohio State, a bunch of announcements, all these key star players coming back. Obviously, you also are adding Will Howard out of the transfer portal and getting some other really big names out of the portal as well. It is reminiscent, Austin, of what happened at Michigan last year, where Blake Corum came back and a lot of guys who could have had NFL opportunities um, decided to bring it back, to run it back one more time. So, Cam, I mean, does it feel like that? Like this is just all the chips being
Oh
pushed
yeah.
in? First year of the 12-team playoff, 3 straight losses to Michigan. Michigan goes out and win a national championship. It's sort of like now or never.
Yeah, yeah. I think you saw, like, there were a few juniors who I think were coming back. Like I think Denzel Burke was coming back. I think he wanted to be a top 15 pick. I think Jack Sawyer was coming back. But I think after the Michigan loss, they got together and they were like, "Hey guys, like we need to run this back." Like none of those guys have beat Michigan, and I mean that's a really good junior class. Like you're talking about guys who will be drafted in the first round next year. Um, they really wanted to come back and make another run at this. They want to beat Michigan. They want to make a run at a national title. I think that was the most important thing for a lot of them. They don't want that to be the last taste in their mouth. And then, like you said, you add, like, once you get those guys back, you're like, oh, okay, you have a really good core. And then you add guys like Will Howard, who you kind of needed a quarterback to step in. And then you add Seth McLaughlin out of Alabama and Caleb Downs out of Alabama and Quinshon Judkins out of Ole Miss. And you put together a roster that, like, on paper, is like, other than Georgia, like I can't really think of another team on paper that has more talent than them right now. So everything's looking like this is an all-in type year for Ohio State, and it's the staff's all in, the roster's all in. It's very obvious right now, I think.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I mean, I don't think it could come at a better time considering all the change that's coming in college football in 2024. Again, we'll come circle back on Ryan Day, Sherrone Moore, how they took over these iconic programs and what it means about each other, because these fan bases are always paying attention to each other. But I want to talk a little bit about the new Big Ten. You guys are covering two of the uh, flagship, the Blue Bloods, the programs that you think of when you think of Big Ten football. We're going to be adding Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. It's going to look really different. We're going to think about the playoff differently. You're not going to immediately write somebody off with one loss. The loser of the game is not going to be eliminated from playoff contention. There's going to be a lot of situations where both those teams will still be very much in the hunt for at-large spots in the playoff. So want to have a little fun here, talk about how you build a rivalry, because we're going to be trying to create some of that and some of that hatred and some of that chemistry and some of the stakes of those types of games against the Oregons and the USCs of the world. But I want to start by hyper focusing on Michigan, Ohio State. So Austin, let's start with you about what makes this rivalry one of the best in sports. Like what takes it to a different level? And not everyone can replicate that, but what works with this one?
Yeah, it's a combination of, number one, it's the history. I mean, that's the really hard thing in this era of college sports with rivalries, is you can't fake that. You can't microwave it. Like, it's the fact that Michigan and Ohio State have this history going back, a century. And also the fact that this game has been one of, if not the most significant rivalry games, determining the landscape of the sport. National championships have been decided by this rivalry. Big Ten championships are decided almost every year by this rivalry. Really going back to the 70s and the 10-year war, when these teams were going back and forth, and were two of the dominant college football programs in the country. All of that is really hard to create when you have new teams coming into the league. And then, besides that, just the fact that these teams don't like each other much at all. These fan bases don't like each other much at all. It's the combination of the hatred with the kind of begrudging respect, right? That, Michigan people can't stand Ohio State, but there's some things that they, in their heart of hearts, maybe kind of envy about Ohio State and maybe a little bit vice versa. So the combination of the hatred, but also the acknowledgement that, like, the team on the other side, like, it's a worthy adversary, right? A worthy opponent.
Cam, you're pretty new to covering this rivalry, to covering Ohio State. So what has been your introduction to this and how it compares to other rivalries you've covered?
Yeah. I think the only rivalry I've covered that kind of compares, and they don't even play every year, is Missouri and Kansas basketball. Those two hate each other, and they don't even play all the time. I covered an exhibition game there, and that was, you would have thought it was a national championship. Like, the amount of hatred they have for each other was unreal. But like, growing up in Cleveland, I know what Ohio State Michigan is. Like, my brother's a diehard Michigan fan. Like, he nearly turned down a Division I scholarship to go walk on at Ohio State because he loves Ohio State so much. And Donovan Edwards had that first touchdown in the national championship game, and he texted me. He said, "I'm just turning this off. I can't watch this." So, like, there's just a hatred there that just I think is unrivaled in sports. And I think currently, or like, I mean, before Harbaugh left, I think the interaction between the two head coaches, I think that helped. I think that, like, revived a lot of it. Like, obviously, Michigan being better again was a big factor in that. But I think Harbaugh and Day truly hating each other just made the rivalry so much better. So you go back to the history, you go back to just fans just despising each other. I think to Austin's point, I think there is a little bit of both programs that each program kind of envies, and I think you can tell because they're just also each so obsessed with each other. Nothing else matters until the last game of the season. I mean, they're obsessed with each other in February about who's recruiting a 4-star, 3-star better than the other program. So it's just a year-round thing, and I think it also, like, it helps that both these programs are so hyper focused on football. Like, football is king at both sports. So, like, at school, both schools. So year-round, they just that's all that matters is Michigan, Ohio State, and I think it's special. I don't think you can make another Ohio State, Michigan. Auburn, Alabama is a big one, but this is just different in a few ways.
Yeah, and it's obviously there's so much history, so you're not going to ever be able to totally replicate that. But I think in terms of proximity, the distance is drivable, right? Like, there's enough, obviously Toledo is very much used as the middle point, and there's, like, it's a very split town/city. So you are constantly around people that went to the other school. It's not the same as an in-state rivalry. Like, I found this really interesting when I went to Michigan because I grew up on pro sports. So I get to Michigan, and I was there for very influential 2007 season. So you have App State, which I got sent videos of people celebrating in Columbus, celebrating in State College. Like some of my Ohio State friends' favorite memories are Michigan losses, not even Ohio State wins, right? Because of what you guys are saying. Like, it's the obsession. It's how much you hate your rival is even feels greater than a win yourself. And I think that year was also Mike Hart's little brother comments, which totally encapsulates in-state rivalries, right? And Austin, you've covered Oregon and Oregon State as well. And so there's something very different in that type of proximity and that type of dynamic where everyone in your office went to one of those schools, probably applied to both, right? Like, that's a different level than Michigan and Ohio State. And I think the one that has sort of replicated this, and I'd be curious if you guys agree or not, since the Big Ten has added some teams, like in the other rounds of realignment, I feel like Nebraska and Iowa hate each other. Like, I feel like those fan bases hate each other. Proximity, it's close enough. They put it on a holiday weekend. Like, it feels like that one has worked. And I don't know that necessarily any of the other, like, I don't know if Rutgers and Maryland have hate, or Rutgers and Penn State, they tried to end the season with that sometimes. I don't think anything's worked quite as well as Nebraska, Iowa. Would that be a fair read on this in terms of newish rivalries?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd
I
agree
can't
with
think
that.
of another one that rivals at all. That would be the closest one. I think it was obvious with Penn State though too. Like, I mean, the Big Ten didn't even think they had a rival. So like,
Unrivaled.
yeah, exactly. So it's hard. I think Iowa, Nebraska for sure.
Yeah. I mean, those two schools are kind of cut from the same cloth, right? Their fan
Yeah.
bases are kind of cut from the same cloth. I'm from that part of the country. I'm willing to admit it. Like, there's a lot of cornfields and a lot of, like, family farms and stuff you drive by out there, and a little bit different, right, than when you make the road trip to DC or something like that. So, yeah, I think there's a natural kinship with those schools, which also creates like a little bit of natural hatred, which you need for a good rivalry, right?
Yeah, and
I
so
will say, I think an added thing for Ohio State, Michigan is that, and I assume this is the case in Michigan. It's definitely the case in Ohio. There's a lot of colleges in Ohio, but no one who goes to any of these MAC schools. I imagine it's the case. Maybe not the case in Cincinnati, but a lot of these schools, everyone there is Ohio State fans. So like, no matter where you go, there's a hatred for Michigan. Even if you go to Kent or a Toledo or a Bowling Green, like I did, like everyone there on Saturday, if your school is playing football at the same time Ohio State is, no one's at the game. So I think it's just so like it's different than an in-state rivalry, but like all of the like everybody cares about Ohio State, everybody cares about Michigan. So it just makes it a little different, I think, too.
yeah. Michigan's a little split because you have so many
Yeah,
state fans. They're
yeah,
very
yeah, Michigan State, yeah.
they're very vocal, but it is going to be interesting. I mean, we're all biased here. I mean, I think it's the best rivalry in college football, but yes, you have the Iron Bowl, you have the Holy War, which is now going to be a conference game in the Big 12. You have the Civil War, the Apple Cup, and thankfully, I mean, those are two rivalries that were very much in doubt after this latest round of realignment, but we will still have Civil War games and Apple Cup games. So they're going to be non-conference games in September. Oregon Washington has been a really big game lately, especially this past season. Two great games that went down to the wire. Austin, you covered Oregon. So I want to talk a little bit about making Oregon Washington their season finale. Like, both of them are obviously going to still have the rivalry games, but they're now non-conference games. Do you like this? Is it going to work? Is that going to become one of the great games on the Big Ten schedule? I mean, I think it's going to start that way. Absolutely. Like, that's one of the ones I'm circling. But do you think that has potential to really elevate?
Yeah, I do. I think for both Oregon and Washington, what you will get is you will get all of the buildup that those two schools had for their in-state rivalries, right? The Apple Cup and the Civil War. Now that will all be building up toward their game at the end of the season, and then on top of that, the rivalry that those two teams have to begin with. I mean, when I covered Oregon, the Oregon State game at the end of the year, um, always felt like that was the game that everybody in the state was glued to, and it didn't always have maybe the national relevance that some other rivalries did. But in that state, it always felt like, because you got both fan bases right there. They're separated by 50 miles, and the Oregon Washington rivalry was a very good rivalry too. But they played it in the middle of the season, and you didn't always know like what either team was going to be in the middle of the season. But by the time you get to Thanksgiving, everything's on the table, right? A lot of times Oregon was playing for everything in that game, and Oregon State had years when they had a lot at stake too. And it gives it a little bit different feel when you're that late in the season, and one team either has a chance to screw up the other team's season, or they're both playing for potentially a playoff trip in the new playoff format. So I expect that rivalry to be really good and really intense, and come in right away as one of the Big Ten's best rivalry games.
Yeah, I do too, and I think especially with Dan Lanning staying, right? I mean, you lose Kalen DeBoer, but Washington should be able to sustain. I mean, both these programs feel like they're on the upswing, but certainly Oregon with Dan Lanning remaining the way that he remained, the way that he was so vocal about everything that he wants is at Oregon and what they can build, a top 3 recruiting class that he just signed this week as well. So that one's going to be really fun. And I also feel like those fan bases in Seattle and Portland also hate each other in a lot of pro sports. So I feel like that adds to it. And that helps as well with these types of rivalries. I want to have a little fun and come up with some new rivalries now that we're getting some weird matchups that are going to be on the regular. I want to read you guys. Our producer Cam came up with some really good ideas. This one's, I think, the most natural, I think, makes the most sense. USC Michigan State, I think we just call it the Trojan War. Considering the two matchup, the mascots, I think I don't even know. Do you need a trophy? Do you just have like a giant Trojan horse?
It's got to
that
be a
like
Trojan horse, right? Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
You just pass it around after each win.
Yeah, it just like I think it needs to be like full size that someone can like get on top of. But I think you just like wheel it out for the winner of that game. I think that's a natural one based on the history of the Spartans and the Trojans. What other ones do you like? Because we're gonna get some weird matchups again. Like, okay, like I like this one. Oregon, Maryland. This is another Cam special, producer Cam. The battle for the pond. I think we can work on the name, but ducks versus terrapins. So ducks versus turtles. I think you can have a lot of fun with like, I mean, maybe it is a pond. It's like a very, just like a kind of a dirty, shallow water where both could be found. I mean, you could have fun with a park. You could have, maybe it is a pond, but I think like there could have some fun with this. It's kind of like how Mike Loxley renamed their the home stadium. They're the Shell, right? Like that's what he wants. I like that. I like that.
So Oregon and Oregon State, there was a movement at one time to have a platypus trophy. It was never like official, but there was one that was made.
Aren't they giving that out?
They don't actually give it out. Last I heard, it was like in a warehouse somewhere. So I don't know what you would get if you crossed a duck and a turtle. I don't think that would be an animal. But you could try. That'd be a cool trophy.
Cam, what about you? Well, you got any good ones?
I'm a fan of the one that producer Cam came up with, Oklahoma and South Carolina, mainly because of the fact that there's the idea of a coach being drenched in paint matching the program's color. I'm a fan of coaches getting drenched in anything. That's the best thing about bowl season for me. I'm a fan of that big time. I would love that.
Yeah, so Cam's idea here is the Real Red Rivalry, and it's about the shade of red. Whose is better? University of South Carolina or Oklahoma? I mean, you could definitely do that, and it could be a red out game. You could lean all into this. We already know that Shane Beamer is willing to have mayo dumped on him. So I think in terms of will something, well, I guess if it's red, it's kind of going to look like blood. But yes, I think that there is some potential. That's a plus.
Exactly. Exactly. The weirder, the better, honestly.
The weirder, the better. Okay. Is there any coach? Because again, like the SEC is getting bigger, the Big 12, at least we're getting the Holy War back on that league. So I'm happy about that. But like there's going to be some weird pairings. I mean, like Stanford and Cal are going to be in the ACC. Which coach is the most likely to pull a Bob Diaco and invent a rivalry or try to force a rivalry? Do we have any coaches that we think could do this?
Which
part of me wishes that James Franklin was this type of personality where he would try to invent something at Penn State because of the whole unrivaled thing, but he's just not. I don't think he's that personality. He's just not that guy.
I feel like the new coach at Indiana, Curt Cignetti.
Oh,
right? I don't know anything about him really, but just like watching his press conferences, he strikes me as the kind of guy who would be like, I want to invent a rivalry. Like Indiana kind of needs, something to be relevant in football. So
yeah, they have the Purdue game, the bucket, the Old Oaken bucket, but that's pretty much it. And, that's a really good call out though, because I met him at the Big Ten title game. And it was like the day after he took the job, and he was out there telling us on the BTN set that Indiana's going to be here next year playing for a Big Ten championship. So, I mean, that's a really good suggestion there. I was even thinking like if Harbaugh were like 15 years younger and in the Big Ten, like he would be the candidate to do that.
That'd be the best.
That would be him. But
Ryan Walters might not be a bad idea at Purdue. Yeah, I covered him when he was at Missouri, and I remember watching the Ohio State Purdue game this year, and he was just walking around the field before the game, and like those fans love him. Like I feel like if he has the personality and he can kind of get the fan base riled up, he could spark something there too. Because that program has a history. Like they've won before.
But he was also willing to go at Michigan. Like he was kind of the first coach,
one of the first
to
people
really,
to do that,
about the sign stealing stuff. I think Brent Venables.
Yeah.
I could see him stirring the pot a little bit as Oklahoma gets into the SEC, as long as they win some games. I mean, I think that is going to be really interesting with those teams going in, because I think Texas and OU are going to, especially Texas, obviously coming off a CFP, but they're going to be coming in at a really high level, which I think can make things spicy and some interesting matchups. And then obviously you got some Southwest Conference foes
You,
reunited as well.
thinking of an SEC coach that who would probably spark something, and I know Missouri already has the Arkansas rivalry, but I feel like Eli Drinkwitz is like,
Yes.
now that Harbaugh's gone, I think of like one of the best personalities in college football. Like he's fantastic. I think he would be. I could see him and Lane Kiffin going at it and just trying to spark a Missouri Ole Miss rivalry out of nothing, because those two are characters.
Which does remind me that Lane Kiffin did chime in on the new Taylor Swift album. He's also excited about it. It's exactly what I was. It was like right. He was obviously watching the Grammys because it was like
Yeah.
instantaneous. I was very excited to see that. But you're right. I mean, this has been a conversation we've had about college football. When you lose Nick Saban as the elder statesman of the game, although he'll be around. It was just announced this week that he is officially going to be on College Gameday, which I think we all expected. He's going to be part of ESPN's draft coverage and some SEC network coverage. But you kind of lose him where the world would stop when Nick Saban would say something or chime in on an issue. Jim Harbaugh was a vocal advocate for players' rights and revenue sharing. So you're kind of losing some of these like faces of the sport. And I think those are really good suggestions of who could be. Certainly if Ohio State turns things around this year, gets back to, playing for national championships, that's the kind of Ryan Day is right in that grouping as well. Could be kind of the face of the sport. I think that they just got to fix some things this offseason, and there's a lot of excitement and attention around that. Before we move on, I do want to say, if you've got suggestions on a brand new rivalry or a fun name for one with the new conferences and the new reimagined world, send us some tweets. Nicole Auerbach, Austin Meek, Cam Teague. You could write us a review on Apple. Tweet anyone. Tweet Ari. Ari loves to engage with people on Twitter, and engage him in some new rivalry game suggestions. I think this has some potential, guys. I think we've identified the right coaches and the right programs for some fun moving forward. But back on the non-fun subject, the hard news that never seems to stop in college football. We'll, I guess, just call it the Auerbach Report, because I cover a lot of this stuff for us. I do want to start on a fun topic, get your guys' thoughts. Just mentioned it. Nick Saban going to College Gameday. Not a huge surprise, but are we excited for this? Do we think this is going to be a good thing for College Gameday?
I'm stoked for it. Yeah, I'm stoked for it. I think that, like, if there's anyone in the sport that you could put on that set, that would like elevate that show to even another level, it's him. Like when people talk about, oh, Bill Belichick is going to go do TV, it's like, really? Like everybody's like, oh, he'd be so good. I don't know. But Sabin would be really good. I'm excited for Sabin.
Yeah, it seems like a perfect fit for me. I figured that would have to be the next step. When he retired, I was like, that has to be the case for him. So it seems like a perfect fit, honestly.
I think what makes him really good at TV when he's done it, and he's done it at like national championship games. I think he's just really good at explaining football for audiences that understand football, and then audiences that have like a very surface level, like introductory level into football. He's really patient with it, and I think that is what makes him really effective as a communicator. So I'm excited to see that. I think the rest of the game day cast is staying the same. So yeah, we'll continue to cover that. We now have Andrew Marshand as a sports media reporter for The Athletic. So lots of coverage of things like that and the impact of Sabin joining ESPN. I'll start next with the Tennessee TRO, the temporary restraining order was denied this week. So this is something that we've obviously been covering a lot on the Until Saturday feed. This is essentially a challenge against the NCAA and their ability to have rules around recruiting and the use of NIL deals. And the argument on the NCAA side is, no recruiting inducements, no pay for play. This should not be the reason that people are signing deals to go to school X. The argument on the other side in part of this lawsuit is that it is affecting players' earning potential. by not being able to sign deals while being recruits, or essentially being, kind of the carrot dangling in front of them to sign to a school and to have an NIL deal while at that school. This is a complicated topic because as we've talked a lot about, people were operating in a gray area or in an area where rules weren't being enforced in front of people's eyes. So now you're kind of retroactively looking into behavior that a lot of schools now engage in. And the best comp I've seen still is, everyone speeds in a certain road in town, and one guy does get caught. And, the defense is, well, everyone was doing it. It essentially was the speed limit didn't exist. And this is lawyers, the attorneys general for the states of Tennessee and Virginia, saying, well, that rule shouldn't exist. The speed limit shouldn't exist. In fact, it is harming those cars' ability to do X. So essentially, this TRO is asking for emergency relief. It's saying this is such a pressing issue that we need to resolve it now. And the crux of that was around National Signing Day, which was Wednesday, February 7th. So asking for this to change and the rules to be rescinded because of signing day. And the court ruled that this was not needed, that it was denied. There was no major reason for this to be an emergency, and for this relief to happen by, again, the 7th. But really interesting line in this ruling from the judge: considering the evidence currently before the court, plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits of their claim under the Sherman Act. The Sherman Act is antitrust law. So essentially what they're arguing here is that, okay, we're not going to do this TRO, this emergency relief, but pretty compelling arguments. The legal environment is really different right now in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling in the Alston case in the summer of 2021, which is why you're seeing a lot of lawsuits. You're seeing challenges of individual rules like the transfer rule, the multi-time transfer rule, and now the NIL recruiting rules, because you had the court rule unanimously against the NCAA on caps related to education benefits. And you also had Justice Brett Kavanaugh saying, hey, if any other business was operating the way the NCAA was, we would say it was illegal. So bring on more challenges. And here they are. So this is going to be interesting as this continues to evolve. Next week, there's a hearing for a preliminary injunction, which could just essentially void the rules themselves, which is essentially what happened in the transfer case. So that's something to watch. It's a technical loss, right? The TRO is denied, but it's not really, if they're signaling that they're probably going to side with the plaintiffs against the NCAA next week. So we'll continue to track that one. Another piece of news that, again, goes at the collegiate model itself is the National Labor Relations Board, the regional office, ruled that Dartmouth's men's basketball players are employees and that they have the right to have a vote and potentially unionize. This is something that I don't know if everyone was following, in part because it was basketball, in part because it's Dartmouth men's basketball, Ivy League. The team isn't very good. And essentially what they're saying is they have schedules, they have constraints on what they can major in, on where they can be, on travel. All of these parts of their schedule are controlled. And that's one of the tests about determining whether or not someone is an employer and an employee relationship. So the NLRB governs private companies. The Ivy League schools are all private. This is something that's different than Northwestern. About a decade ago, Northwestern was the only private school in the Big Ten. So they actually got through this stage as well from a regional office. But in part of why it didn't go further was the argument that you can't really have like a one school union that operates. But in the Ivy League, you could theoretically have an Ivy League players union that can negotiate on behalf of all the Ivy League athletes with the Ivy League to create policies and to decide things. And that's kind of where you would think the next step on this would go. Obviously, also that men's basketball team will have a vote, and people will determine, if they are going to form a union. So this is significant because it's any unionization attempt. We talk a lot about revenue sharing and where this model is going, but also the idea that this is different than when Northwestern did it. It's a different legal climate, it's a different environment, and this regional director ruled that it doesn't matter if the team makes money. It doesn't matter if the team is successful. It is about an employer-employee relationship and the control they have over your schedule and over decisions in your life. And so, again, it's private schools, it's the Ivy League. We could end up with an Ivy League players union. This stuff impacts everyone else because A, unionization attempts inspire other unionization attempts. But B, all of this is the same legal environment. This is all going to be quoted and used in each other's arguments as well. So when you talk about the control that even an Ivy League coach and administration have over an athlete's schedule, that's only going to be exacerbated when you're talking about USC or Michigan or Ohio State. So all of this is really important to pay attention to, even if there are still more steps that need to happen before, kind of like the system faces a reckoning. It's being challenged on an almost daily basis right now, and that's the important part, is that the little cracks are becoming bigger cracks in the NCAA's foundation. And so these are the cases that are going to eventually change the system. We're just not there yet. But these are significant rulings, significant interpretations. Even if they are going to be appealed, you're going to continue to track them. And obviously, there's also federal antitrust cases that are working their way through the system as well. Okay, 2 other quick points, and I want to get the guys' thoughts on the SEC Big Ten relationship. But before that, Warner Brothers, Disney, and Fox are collaborating on a streaming service. They're trying to essentially rebundle sports TV. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on this too, Austin. What was your reaction to seeing this, or to the idea that maybe it's going to be like a $50 bundle to watch live sports this way? Does that help live sports? Like, is that a good thing for college football?
I mean, I have way too many streaming services. So anything that would allow me to get rid of some streaming services, I would probably sign up for. I signed up for Peacock. I held out on Peacock the whole college football season. I was tempted a few times. But then they got me with the NFL playoff game. I'm such a sucker. I signed up for it. Now I'm doing a full 30 Rock rewatch,
Yes.
getting my money's worth.
Peacock is underrated, man. There's a lot of good shows on there.
It's actually not bad. In terms of the streaming services that I'm throwing money away to have, Peacock is actually, I think, one of the better ones.
Yeah. We are a dedicated Peacock family in my household.
Well, I'm due for a Parks and Rec rewatch for my doppelganger. I haven't supported her in a project recently,
I couldn't sleep the other night and just started rewatching it again.
Oh, so good. So good. Season 3 of Parks and Rec might be a perfect season of television. That's it's so good. But I do think in the Peacock example is a good one, as you guys cover the Big Ten. They have a lot of media partners now, and this is where a lot of this is going, and people have been waiting for that rebundling. I wonder, we're still waiting on what the new CFP deal is and how many partners there are. We know ESPN is putting in a big bid to own the exclusive rights to the new CFP. But the cooperation on the streaming, this bundle, I don't know. I feel like it can only be good. And I think I like YouTube TV. A lot of people like Sling, but I think having more options, people can figure it out financially and then kind of piece it together. It does give you a lot of what you need for college football, but not everything. So there's no CBS, no NBC, no Peacock. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Last piece of news before I get to mailbag question that I want to get both your thoughts on about Sherrone Moore is the Big Ten and the SEC advisory group. I've been joking all week. I'm not going to call it an alliance. I'm not going to call it an alliance. I'm not going to call it an alliance. My editor Eric put that in the headline when we made this story on Friday when they announced it. It's where is this alliance going? And it's well, I don't know if we should use that word. But let's talk about this. And Cam, maybe you first on this. What does it mean if the Big Ten and the SEC are forming this group? They're not going to be able to make decisions. I think that's very careful, and they put that in for legal reasons. But what does it mean if they're working together?
I think it's just a huge step towards them being the two really kind of dominant conferences in college athletics. I mean, I think it's already like you can already see it. There's a clear um, difference between them and the ACC and the Big 12 right now. But I think if you're putting the Big 10 and the SEC together, like you said, not to make decisions, but to kind of come together and talk about where college football and where college athletics can go, I think it's just a step into those two really kind of taking over. I think, especially when you're already hearing, like, especially with all the Florida State stuff that went on, I think it's just very obvious to me that those two conferences are going to take over at some point, and this is kind of that first step towards that, in my opinion.
Yeah, because so many moves have been like the Big Ten and the SEC positioning themselves against each other, right? Like fortifying their own positions with an eye on the other one. And now it feels like we're maybe moving into an era of college sports where they have acquired so much power that their path forward now is to try to join together more because like there's not that much left for them to take, right? Like they've taken most of the big brands. Another like do we even need another round of expansion for the Big Ten and the SEC? Maybe not. So now they're at the point where they're not going to get more powerful necessarily by getting bigger. They might get more powerful by working together somehow.
There's definitely a lot of concern and raised eyebrows across college sports because they can say it's not about a breakaway, it's not about X, Y, and Z. But I think people see that they're positioning themselves to potentially do that someday, or to do you spin football out separately and have that, that again, we talk about the AFC, NFC thing, but it gives you more options, I think. And I understand the idea of, well, we're frustrated, we can't get anything else done, we need to tackle this stuff. But these are still commissioners that have gone to Congress and lobbied for NIL federal help, right? Like they're still tethered to a lot of the ideas of what people have had in college sports. And Greg Sankey has been very involved in the NCAA, and he was on the transformation committee. So I don't necessarily think like a breakaway is imminent, but I do think people are preparing for them to try to dictate where this is going, or what they could offer to try to stave off actual employer status. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. You make a great point, Austin, about the size of these conferences. 18 teams are going to be in the Big Ten as of the summer, 16 in the SEC. That's 34 of, if we talk about the Power 5 teams, it's about 65 schools. So now all of a sudden you're talking about 34 schools, and basically they have gotten all the schools that they wanted except the ones that are in the ACC because they haven't been available, which is why we're tracking that Florida State lawsuit. Well, I guess the dueling lawsuits, the ACC is against them as well, so closely, because that is going to also matter if there is going to be another round, or, just sort of like further stratification of like the absolute most valuable schools and everybody else. It came up when I was talking to someone about this last week. The Big Ten basketball tournament starting next year, because it's going to be so big, is not going to include everybody. So it's the bottom schools that are not having good seasons are not going to play there. Does that set off alarm bells for you guys in terms of like, would these leagues, as they continue to try to be powerful and dictate the future, would they abandon the least valuable that are already in their conference? Or do you think this is straight up logistics about a basketball tournament?
It's a logistical thing in my mind. Like it's tough because I don't know how you run a basketball tournament with 18 teams. Like that just, I mean, you're talking about like a week and a half type thing. And as a media member, I don't want to be there for a week and a half. That's not fun to me. So I think logistically that'd be tough to do. But I do think you have a point. Like I think some of these conferences are going to start weeding out the lower tier teams. Years like once I think we're going to see a lot once the ACC teams are able to move, and some of these conferences might start weeding out some of their lesser teams, and then adding in bigger teams. I think that'll be a big thing to see. But logistically, I don't know how you do a lot of these sports and a lot of these sports tournaments with all these teams in these conferences. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a combination of both. Of just when these leagues get this size, there are a lot of logistical problems, and like how do you administer a league in all of the sports other than football? But I do think it's a legitimate concern. Like, is the next step in this going to be now we're looking at the schools within our leagues, and there's some schools that have like been in this league for 100 years, but they are not pulling their weight relative to the other schools in this conference. And I mean, we know that all the schools are going to want to keep making more money. There's no school that's going to be like, okay, we've got enough money. We don't need to make more. And so there's a certain point where the only way you're going to make more money is to make the pie smaller. And that could be a scary day for some schools, like a Northwestern, in the Big Ten, that's not, generating the same value as a Michigan or an Ohio State, but yet is a big part of the league going back a long time. Are some of those schools going to get nervous at some point? I don't know.
Yeah, there's still so much uncertain about how this looks and how it's set up, and that's why we're tracking on all of these different lawsuits and these NLRB cases and rulings, and we'll continue to try to do that throughout the off season as there are developments. Before we go, guys, want to wrap up on a mailbag question. You guys are the perfect people to ask this question to. I'm going to start with Austin, but I want both of you to answer this from Jordan T. The Michigan-Ohio State rivalry never ends. Editor's note, I agree. Back to the question. Ohio State fans are claiming that Sherrone Moore is now standing on third base, but I'm not sure Michigan is going to be anywhere near the level that Ohio State was when Urban Meyer left and Ryan Day took over. Can you compare the two situations in regards to the inherited roster, the staff, etc.? Austin, I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. That I don't think Sherrone Moore is standing on third base. I think Sherrone Moore is going to be like in the batter's box next year, thinking like, hey, if Michigan can like win 8 or 9 games, I personally, where I'm sitting right now, just looking at the roster, and of course it's going to change, and maybe I'll feel differently about it in August or September. But I don't see this as a Michigan team that is getting ready to do what Ohio State did in Ryan Day's first season or first couple years, right? So I do think it's a different situation, some parallels, but I do think it's different. I don't know. Cam, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. I think it's perfect for the rivalry. I think it's every time I saw it on social media, I laughed. I love this type of stuff, but I do think it's different. I like you said, Austin. I don't think Michigan's going to be at the level they are this year or in last year. I think, like you said, probably 8 or 9 wins is where they're at. I mean, Ohio State went 13-1 in 2019. That's a different level that Urban Meyer had that program out at, and Ryan Day stepped in. Now, I don't know that I've ever agreed with the like born on third base thought, but if that's the case, it's definitely not the case with Sherrone Moore. I think it's a completely different, especially like we talked earlier. Like, I mean, with Harbaugh taking so many coaches, he has to completely change this program. So it's completely different in my mind, but I love it. If people want to keep arguing about it, it's hilarious. I love it. Anytime I see it on Twitter or comments, I'm all about it. I'm not going to keep it to say it or keep it going, but I just love the rivalry. It's so funny to me.
It is funny because one of the, again, like refrains, commentary is about from promoting from within and walking into a good situation. And then Michigan hands the keys off after winning a national championship.
Yeah.
And I'm with you guys. I mean, the cupboard is not the same. The expectations will still be sky high. Absolutely. But I think it will be a little bit different considering all that was lost and the timing of the coaching change impacting the staffing and some of those other decisions as well. But I love the question. I think it's a really smart observation. It's going to be really fun to watch this all play out and the banter back and forth between these two programs. Austin, Cam, it has been awesome to be with you guys. Really appreciate you making time for this, and can't wait to continue to read your off-season coverage from Ann Arbor and Columbus.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. As a reminder, you can subscribe to this podcast until Saturday on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Please support our show by dropping a 5-star review, leaving a comment, subscribing to our YouTube page so you can watch our shows live as well. Leave us a voicemail on our phone line. Send us mailbag questions online. We'll be here all off season whenever there's news. And even when there's not, we're going to have some fun. But that'll do it for this Until Saturday episode. Austin, Meek, Cam Teague, and Nicole Auerbach, appreciate you spending time with us. We'll talk to you again soon.